I can reveal the Albanese government pressured police to publicly state that the caravan plot was not a terror-related incident. This was despite the risk of jeopardising the investigation, which was ongoing, with suspects still under surveillance and arrests yet to be made. Multiple sources involved in the joint counter-terror investigation told me there was a push from the Albanese government to get the caravan hoax narrative into the public domain before the federal election. And that was meant to be called on Sunday, March the 9th. It was postponed because of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred. One well-placed senior policing source told me, and I quote, "They've had a desire to call it out as not a terror incident for some time, based on the fact they needed to de-escalate it prior to any election being called." Now, I have confirmed that the AFP pressured New South Wales Police to agree to release publicly that the caravan was a criminal con job for at least 2 weeks before the press conference on Monday this week. But New South Wales Police pushed back. They were furious at what they saw as political interference in a delicate and difficult police investigation. They had counter-surveillance operations running. They were conducting coercive examinations and were still in the midst of their own investigation, which included building a watertight case against 14 suspects, who they arrested just on Monday morning. Law enforcement officials feared that going public prematurely could have risked compromising their investigation. Now, when New South Wales Police agreed with the decision to go public with the information, it was understood to have required a change in strategy. Now, the AFP had determined that organised crime was behind the explosive-laden caravan and that it did not pose an active terror threat. The AFP then briefed key figures in the Albanese government about this development. And the Albanese government, which was preparing for an election to be called just on Sunday for the 12th of April, were then keen to get this information made public. Now, the election was meant to be called on Sunday. Then on Monday morning, New South Wales Police arrested 14 people over the spate of anti-Semitic attacks in Sydney's east. And AFP Deputy Commissioner for National Security, Chrissy Barrett, and both New South Wales Police Deputy Commissioner Dave Hudson, they both held a press conference announcing that day that the caravan packed with explosives was a fabricated terror plot.
Almost immediately, experienced investigators within the Joint Counter-Terrorism team believed that the caravan was part of a fabricated terrorist plot, essentially a criminal con job. This was because of the information they already had, how easily the caravan was found, and how visible the explosives were in the caravan. Also, there was no detonator.
Right after the press conference that night and again the next day, Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke was ready with the attack lines.
Mr Dutton, without seeking a briefing, simply asserted a large-scale planned terrorist attack. That is not what we were dealing with. We were dealing with a criminal con job, and Peter Dutton was one of the people who was conned.
Of course, Tony Burke's accusation there was nonsense because both the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, had also spoken about the caravan being a terrorism threat.
Do you classify this as terrorism as well, Prime Minister?
I certainly do. I agree with Chris Minns. It's clearly designed to harm people, but it's also designed to create fear in the community.
This is the discovery of a potential mass casualty event. There's only one way of calling it out, and that is terrorism. That's what we're very worried about.
But the point is that Tony Burke, the Home Affairs Minister, was ready to roll with his attack lines on what was meant to be the first day of the election campaign. Now, when Albanese was asked repeatedly when he was first briefed on the caravan of explosives, he claimed he couldn't comment because he wouldn't dare undermine a police investigation.
I have no intention of undermining an ongoing investigation by going into the details. This should not be the source of political debate.
Yet he did exactly that. According to multiple senior police figures, the Albanese government did undermine and interfere with the police investigation. Now, I asked Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor about this. I've got him on the show tonight. I spoke to him just before, and he said these are serious concerns that need to be investigated.
If the Prime Minister has been interfering in a police investigation and pressuring them to do the spin for the government that the government wants, this is completely inappropriate.
Now, here's the thing. There's now a major push by the media, like the Sydney Morning Herald, the Greens, the Independents, the Libertarians, and some Labor MPs to downplay anti-Semitism as a result of organised crime being behind the spate of violent attacks targeting Jewish sites. But I've discovered, and I've spoken to very well-placed police, that anti-Semitism hasn't been ruled out as a motive for these attacks. Now, I've drilled down deeply on this topic, and I found out that there are figures from 2 different outlaw motorcycle gangs who are being investigated. One of the figures at the centre of this is the Australian. He's actually a dual citizen. He's based offshore, and he was paying locally based criminals to carry out the spate of violent attacks that targeted Jewish businesses, cars and properties. But the Joint Counter-Terror Team still do not categorically know his motivations. Federal police haven't ruled out that a foreign actor isn't paying this individual. Anti-Semitism has not been ruled out as a motivation either. In fact, one police source told me, and I'm quoting now, anti-Semitism could be the motive, or it could be a range of things. So how this plot worked is that this Australian dual citizen based overseas then paid local street criminals to carry out the spate of anti-Semitic attacks. And these local criminals are understood to have accepted the paid jobs through various encrypted apps. Police are not certain about which country the Australian dual citizen is currently in. They are not close to making an arrest. In fact, an arrest could be a year or more away. The figure is understood to be a successful global criminal who's well connected with multiple motorcycle gangs and other criminal organisations. The investigation is still active and ongoing, and to me it seems that there's more that the police don't know than what they do know. Yet despite this, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns is tonight facing a crossbench revolt over his hate speech laws. The Sydney Morning Herald is reporting that he's facing a revolt from the crossbench and also aggrieved Labor MPs, and they want that his hate speech laws to either be repealed or subject to a parliamentary inquiry. And this is apparently all because there is no anti-Semitism threat, because the caravan packed with explosives was organised by criminals rather than a live terror threat. This is absolute nonsense. These are all people who never cared about anti-Semitism in the first place. Every single violent attack, including the firebombing of a preschool, the torching of cars in front of Alex Rifchin's house, is an anti-Semitic attack. Just because it might have been carried out by organised crime doesn't mean it wasn't an anti-Semitic attack. As journalist Stephen Rice says in The Australian today, for the police to have ruled out the motivations of a suspect they haven't yet questioned or even caught or even approached is a highly unusual approach. And I'd say it's a shocking and dangerous approach. Stephen Rice says in The Australian that these comments by police have given free rein to anyone who wanted to downplay the level of anti-Semitism experienced by the Jewish community. And he asks, well, what about the attempt to set fire to the Newtown synagogue in January? He questions how anyone, and let alone a Greens politician, could question that this was anti-Semitism. Yet this is what the accusations are, that it's not anti-Semitism. How can you say an arson attempt on a Newtown synagogue is not anti-Semitism? Stephen Rice says this is absurd. He says this is the absurdity of being asked to agree to a sentiment that this was not an anti-Semitic attack. And even Dave Hudson, the New South Wales Deputy Police Commissioner, admitted in questioning in budget estimates yesterday that they did not know the actual ideology or motivation of these people, that it is still under investigation. Now, thankfully, despite the absolute disgrace of those in New South Wales Parliament using this as an opportunity to attack a popular Premier, Chris Minns is standing firm. Chris Minns has released a statement saying he will not repeal the hate speech laws. And why should he? The caravan filled with explosives has nothing to do with hate speech. The hate speech laws are needed to finally crack down on those hate speeches and pro-Palestinian activists who insist on saying the most derogatory comments about Jews, yet they get away scot-free because none of the laws apply. Chris Minns' strength is the leadership we need in this country. And simply for standing up to anti-Semitism, his own colleagues are trying to tear him down. Well, let's hope they're not successful. Now, I also want to say here that I've approached Mark Speakman's office tonight for comment to get reassurance that he's not going to get in on this and demand that there's a parliamentary inquiry on these hate speech laws. I couldn't contact Mark Speakman. He's in a regional area. But if the coalition sides with the Greens, with the Libertarians, with some aggrieved Labor MPs just to attack Chris Minns, then this would be an indictment on the coalition in New South Wales. An absolute indictment. It would be unforgivable for the New South Wales coalition if they don't stand firm with Chris Minns on this. Now, in relation to my story tonight, that the Prime Minister has put pressure on the police, I've contacted the Prime Minister's office for comment. They haven't replied. A spokeswoman for the AFP said the timing of Monday's press conference was decided by the Joint Counter-Terror Team, which included New South Wales Police. And she said the AFP's priority has been to ensure community safety, investigate those responsible for the alleged crime, provide the truth to the Jewish community, and that the investigations were ongoing.